She was already sitting in the window seat when I found row 27, and the second I stopped to check my boarding pass against the number, she reached up, took my hand off the top of my rolling bag, and held it in both of hers like she'd been waiting for me her whole life. "Please don't pull away," she said low and fast, her eyes fixed on something down the aisle behind me. "I know how this sounds. Be my husband until this flight lands. 4 hours. That's all I'm asking. Then you'll never see me again, I swear." I'd never seen this woman before, auburn hair pulled back, a coat too warm for the cabin still on her shoulders, and a grip on my hand that was shaking, even though her voice wasn't. And I had spent the entire week being told, in about 6 different ways, that I was a man no one needed, so I set my bag down, and I sat. That is how I met my wife. Let me back up. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 36 years old, and I fix pianos for a living. Not the exciting kind of music work. I'm not on a stage anywhere. I'm the man they call when a concert hall's Steinway goes flat 2 days before a performance, or when somebody's grandmother dies and the family finally opens up the old upright in the parlor and finds it hasn't been tuned since the Carter administration. I show up with a felt roll of tools, and I make the broken thing sing again, and then I leave before anyone claps. My father did the same work before me. Walter Mercer had hands like a bricklayer and an ear like a bat, and he could stand in a doorway, hear one chord from across a room, and tell you which single string was a hair sharp. He taught me the whole trade sitting on a bench beside him from the time I was 7, and he taught me something else too, though I didn't understand it for years. He used to say, "Danny, a piano isn't broken when it's out of tune. It's just lonely. Nobody's been listening close enough to notice it drifted." He'd tap the middle C, that low, honest note, and say, "Our whole job is listening to a thing everybody else walked past. That's it. That's the work. Anybody can bang the keys. Almost nobody sits still long enough to hear what's actually wrong." He was married to my mother for 38 years. Near the end, when the cancer had him thin and quiet in a hospital bed, he held my hand, the same way a stranger would years later on a plane, and he said, "You listen better than any man I ever met, Danny, to pianos. Now I need you to promise me you'll do it for a person someday. Find somebody and listen to her the way you listen to a bad note. Don't wait till you're my age to figure out the loneliest instrument in the house was the one you married." I told him I would. I was lying, and he knew it, and he squeezed my hand anyway because he was tired, and it was kinder to let me lie. He passed on a Thursday, and after that I got very, very good at being alone. I told myself it was the work. Pianos don't call you back late. They don't leave. A piano you fix stays fixed, and it's grateful in the only way an object can be. It sounds right. People are the opposite. People go out of tune the moment you stop paying attention, and I had decided somewhere along the line that I'd rather not risk the disappointment. Which brings me to the week before that flight. I'd been seeing a woman named Claire for a little over a year. She was bright and quick, and she laughed at things before other people got them, and I'd let myself think, quietly, that maybe this was the promise I'd made my dad finally coming due. I was flying home that week from her city, where I'd gone to surprise her for her birthday. I'd brought a ring. I'd been carrying it in my coat pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. The right moment never came, because on the second night, over dinner, before I could reach for the box, Claire set down her fork and told me she'd been wanting to talk. She told me she'd met someone. A man from her office, funny and spontaneous, the kind of person who booked a trip to another country on a Tuesday just because. "You're so steady, Daniel," she said, and I could hear her reaching for a compliment and finding an insult by accident. "You're the calmest, kindest man I've ever dated. But being with you is it's like listening to the same beautiful song on repeat. I love the song. I just can't hear it for the rest of my life." The same song on repeat. My father spent his whole life teaching me that one true note held long enough is the most beautiful thing in the world, and the woman I'd bought a ring for told me a true note was boring. I flew home the next morning with the ring still in my coat pocket because I hadn't been able to make myself throw it away. 36 years old, a felt roll of tools in the overhead bin, feeling like the loneliest instrument in the house, the one nobody had listened to closely enough to notice I'd drifted years ago. That's who I was when a stranger took my hand in row 27 and told me to be her husband. Before I tell you what happened when that plane started coming down, and I promise you it's not what either of us expected. If you believe that the person sitting there certain they'll never be chosen might be exactly one row away from the moment that changes everything, do me a small favor and tap that subscribe button, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. All right, back to the plane. "What's my name?" I said. She blinked at me. Up close, her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying in the terminal and had put herself back together with Will alone. "What?" "If I'm your husband for 4 hours, I should know my own name, and yours, and how we met." I clicked my seatbelt. "You've got until the doors close to teach me our marriage, so talk fast." Something crumpled and then steadied in her face. Relief, I think. The specific relief of a drowning person feeling their foot touch the bottom. "You're really—" "You asked. I'm answering. Names. Go." "Rachel," she said. "Rachel Hale. We've been married 3 years. You can keep your real first name. It's easier. What is it?" "Daniel." "Daniel." She tried it out like a word in a new language. "Okay. Daniel, we met at— God, I don't know. Pick something." "A wedding?" I said. We were both seated at the singles table, the bad one by the kitchen doors, and the band was terrible, and I asked you to dance mostly so we'd have an excuse to complain about them together. That's easy to remember. It's the kind of thing that's true even when it isn't. She stared at me. Yeah, that's good. That's really good." "I fix pianos," I said, "so I know something about bad wedding bands. What do you do?" "I'm a pediatric nurse." She said it fast, then caught herself. "That part's real. That one's real." And then the man came down the aisle. I felt her whole body go rigid beside me before I even saw him, the way you feel a storm in your knee before the sky changes. He was tall, well-dressed, mid-40s, with the kind of relaxed confidence that fills a space and pushes everyone else to the edges of it. He stopped at row 27 and looked down at us, and he smiled, and the smile never once reached his eyes. "Rachel," he said. "Well, small world." "Marcus," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. Only I could feel her fingers still laced through mine under the armrest, gone white at the knuckle. His eyes went to me, then to our joined hands, then to my left hand, where, and I will never fully explain why I did this, I had, in the 90 seconds she'd been briefing me, quietly slid the ring out of my coat pocket, the ring I'd bought for Claire, and put it on. "And this is," Marcus said. "My husband," Rachel said. "Daniel. Daniel, this is Marcus. We used to work together." I put out my free hand and shook his, firm and easy, the way my father shook every stranger's hand, like a man with nothing in the world to prove. "Good to meet you," I said. "She's mentioned the old job." I hadn't the faintest idea what the old job was. I said it like I'd heard 100 stories. Marcus's eyes flicked to the ring, and something in his face recalculated. "Husband," he said. "I hadn't heard you'd gotten married, Rachel." "There's a lot you haven't heard," she said. "That's rather the point." He stood there a beat too long. Then he glanced at his own boarding pass. "Well, I'm just up in 24. Long flight. I'm sure we'll catch up." And he moved on, and I watched Rachel's eyes track him in the reflection of the darkened window until he sat down 3 rows ahead, on the opposite aisle, close enough to turn around, close enough to watch. She let out a breath that trembled at the very end of it, and she did not let go of my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I saw him board and I panicked. You were the only person walking toward the empty seat next to me, and you looked—" She stopped. "I looked what?" "Kind," she said. "You looked kind and tired. like you'd understand." She closed her eyes. "Give me a minute and I'll explain. And then if you want to switch seats with someone, I completely understand. I've already asked too much." "You've married me," I said. "The least you can do is tell me who I've married into. We've got 4 hours. Start at the top." She almost laughed. It came out wet. "And then, because we had 4 hours and a lie to hold up, and because sometimes the easiest person to tell the truth to is a stranger you've decided you'll never see again, Rachel Hale told me everything. Her name really was Rachel. She really was a pediatric nurse. And Marcus, the man in 24, had been her manager 4 years ago at the hospital where she used to work 2 states away, the state we were both flying toward now. He was charming, she said, turning the fake ring on my finger without seeming to know she was doing it. Everyone loved him. Administration loved him. And he decided he'd loved me, and when I told him I wasn't interested, that I'd never be interested, that he was my boss and it wasn't happening. He smiled exactly the way he smiled at you just now. And then, over the next 8 months, he made my life a slow, deniable hell. She told me how it worked. Never anything you could put your finger on. Her good shifts quietly reassigned. Her competence questioned in meetings in front of people whose opinion mattered. A complaint from a patient's family that she was almost certain he'd manufactured. The story, spread carefully, that Rachel was difficult, that Rachel was unstable, that Rachel had a problem with authority. By the time I left, she said, half the people I'd worked with for 6 years thought I'd flamed out, thought I'd had some kind of breakdown. He rewrote me, and I let him, because fighting it would have meant living inside it another year, and I just wanted to be gone. So you left, I said. I ran, she said. I took a job in a different state, started over, built a whole new life where nobody had heard the Rachel is difficult story. She looked at her lap. And it worked. For 4 years it worked. So why are you on this flight? And here her voice changed, went smaller. My sister, she said. Emma, she's 26. She just got a nursing job at that same hospital. My old one. She was so proud, Daniel. She called me. She was crying. She said she got into the best pediatric program in the region. Rachel pressed her lips together. And I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her that the man who runs half that department is the man who spent 8 months dismantling her big sister. Because if I told her, she'd turn it down. She'd throw away the job she's wanted her whole life to protect me from a thing that already happened. And Emma's spent her whole life being the one I protected. I couldn't flip it. I couldn't make my ruin her problem. So you're flying out there, I said slowly. To what? Warn her? To be there for her first week, Rachel said. To be present in the building, so if he starts on her the way he started on me, I'll know. I'll see it early. I'll be able to help her the way nobody helped me. She let out a shaky breath. I told myself I could handle being in the same city as him again, in the same building. I told myself 4 years was enough distance. She looked up at the reflection of row 24 in the black window. And then I walked onto the plane, and there he was, going to the same city, and every single thing he did to me came back at once. And I couldn't sit here for 4 hours as the woman he broke. Not in front of him, so I grabbed the first kind face I saw, and I made myself somebody's wife, somebody he couldn't touch, somebody who'd moved on so completely she had a whole husband he'd never heard of. She looked at me, stricken. I'm not proud of it, but there it is. I sat with that for a long moment. The engines hummed. The seatbelt sign was still on. 3 rows up I could see the top of Marcus's head, and once as I watched, it turned very slightly toward us and then away. And something in me, the switched-off thing, the part that had been dark since a Thursday years before, flickered. Because I knew about swallowing yourself to protect someone. I knew about deciding you were the instrument nobody needed to hear. And I knew, better than almost anyone, what it costs to let somebody rewrite the truth of who you are while you stand there and take it, because fighting back is louder than you have the strength to be. My father tuned pianos, I said. Same as me. 30 years. He used to say a piano's never really broken. It's just gone out of tune because nobody listened close enough to catch it drifting. Rachel watched me, not understanding yet. That's what he did to you, I said. Marcus, he didn't break you. He just told everyone you were broken, loud enough and long enough that people stopped listening close enough to hear you were fine the whole time. You were never out of tune, Rachel. You were just surrounded by people who wouldn't sit still long enough to hear it. Her eyes filled. She looked away, out the window, and I gave her the moment. So here's what I think, I said. I think for the next 4 hours, you don't have to be the woman he broke. I think you get to be somebody who's fine, better than fine, married and steady and completely out of his reach. And I think you should let me help you do that because I've got nothing else to do for 4 hours. And honestly, I stopped and then I said the truest thing I had. Honestly, it's been a long time since anybody looked at me like I was solid enough to hold on to. You could stand to borrow a husband. I could stand to be one for a while. She turned back to me. You keep saying things like that. Like you know exactly what this feels like. I bought a ring last week, I said, and I held up my hand, the plain band catching the reading light. This one. For a woman who told me over dinner that being with me was like hearing the same song on repeat, that I was too steady to love for a whole life. I turned the ring. I've been carrying it in my coat for 3 days trying to figure out how to throw it away. So when you needed a wedding ring 90 seconds ago, I had one. That's the whole reason it fit. It was already looking for a hand that wanted it. Rachel Hale looked at me for a long, long moment, and then she did something I didn't expect. She reached over and very gently laced her fingers through mine again, not gripping this time, not drowning, just holding. Then we're a match set, she said quietly. 2 people the wrong person walked away from. Okay, Daniel the piano tuner, be my husband. Let's give the man in 24 the most boring, happily married 4 hours of his life. And so for 4 hours at 35,000 feet, we built a marriage. We invented it detail by detail, heads bent together, laughing under our breath. The wedding at which we met, the terrible band, the kitchen door table, a first apartment with a radiator that clanked like a percussion section, which delighted her, a nurse who worked nights and had never once thought about what a piano tuner's ears do in an apartment full of clanking pipes, a dog we were thinking about, her mother, who thought I talked too little, my mother gone now, who she decided would have loved Rachel on sight. We built it like set dressing for the man 3 rows ahead. But somewhere in the building of it, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing and we started actually talking. The real way. The way you only can with a person when the guard is all the way down because none of it is supposed to count. She told me about Emma, how she'd half-raised her after their parents' divorce, how Emma still called her before every big decision. I told her about my father, the felt roll of tools, the doorway trick, the middle C. She told me about the kids on her ward, the ones who got better and the ones who didn't, and how she'd learned to be steady in a room where everyone else was falling apart because somebody had to be, and it might as well be the one whose hands didn't shake. My hands don't shake either, I said. Tuning, you can't tune with shaking hands. Nursing too, she said, and held up her free hand flat and still, and I held up mine beside it, and we looked at the 2 steady hands in the reading light and laughed. Because of course, 2 people whose whole lives were being the calm one for everybody else had reached across an aisle for each other. The drink cart came. I bought her a bad red wine and myself a coffee. She told me I took my coffee black like a man who'd given up on the small pleasures, and I told her she wasn't wrong, and she looked at me like she'd decided to do something about it. Around the 2nd hour, Marcus came back, ostensibly for the restroom, but he stopped at our row on the way men like that always circle back. Daniel, was it? He said. So how'd you 2 lovebirds meet? And Rachel and I answered in perfect, overlapping unison, a wedding. And I put my hand over hers on the armrest, the ring in plain sight, and I smiled up at him with all the calm my father ever taught me. And I said, terrible band, Best night of my life. You dance, Marcus? There's an art to a bad wedding. Rachel could teach a seminar. He looked at our hands. He looked at the ease of us, the practiced overlap, the way she leaned into my shoulder. And whatever he'd come back to find, a crack, a hesitation, a story that didn't hold, he didn't find it. His smile thinned to nothing. "Enjoy the flight," he said, and went to the back of the plane. And when he came back up the aisle, he didn't slow down. When he was gone, Rachel exhaled and turned to me, and there was something new in her face. Not panic, something closer to wonder. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm good at holding one note steady while everyone waits for it to crack," I said. "It's basically the whole job." "No," she said quietly, studying me. "You're good at making a person feel safe. That's different. That's rarer." She looked down at the ring on my hand. "The woman who told you you were a song on repeat. She's an idiot, Daniel. Do you know that? A steady man isn't boring. A steady man is the only kind you can actually build a life on top of. Everybody figures that out eventually. She'll figure it out too late. They always do." I didn't have anything to say to that. It went into me somewhere that had been closed a long time and turned a key. We flew on. Somewhere over the middle of the country, the cabin lights dimmed for the long stretch, and in the half-dark she told me the thing she was most afraid of, that she'd get out there and be brave and stand guard over Emma, and Marcus would simply start again, on her sister this time, and there'd be nothing she could do but watch it happen to somebody she loved. "I keep thinking I should just tell Emma the truth," she said. "But the truth costs her the job, and I've spent 4 years being the woman who ran. What's my word worth against his out there in that building? He rewrote me once already. I have no proof. I have a reputation he built for me." Her voice cracked. "I have nothing but the fact that I know what he is, and knowing isn't evidence." And then the captain came on. We were beginning our descent. Rachel sat up. She looked out the window at the lights of the city coming up out of the dark, her old city, the one she'd run from. And I watched 4 years of dread come back into her shoulders all at once. The husband was about to expire. In 20 minutes the doors would open, and she'd be alone again, walking off this plane back into the exact life the man in 24 had ruined for her. "Thank you," she said, not looking at me. "For 4 hours I got to be someone he didn't break. I'll remember that." She started to slide the ring off her finger. "Keep it on till we're at the gate," I said. "He's still up there. Let him watch us walk off together." She nodded and left it on, and that's when the flight attendant came down the aisle for the pre-landing check, and stopped at our row. She was young, and she'd clearly been working the front of the cabin, and she crouched down next to Rachel with the particular careful voice people use when they're about to say something they've been working up to. "I'm sorry to bother you both," she said quietly. This is unusual, but I've been up in the front galley for the last 2 hours, and the gentleman in 24 has been on the phone, on the ground Wi-Fi, loudly. I asked him twice to keep his voice down." She hesitated. "He was talking about a woman named Rachel. He said—" She glanced at Rachel's face and clearly saw she'd landed in the right row. "He said he'd handled her once and could handle her again. He said her sister was starting Monday and it wouldn't be hard. He was laughing about it. I've been sick about it for an hour. And then I saw your name on the manifest for this row." She swallowed. "You're Rachel, aren't you?" The plane was descending. I could feel it in my ears, and I watched Rachel Hale go completely, perfectly still. "He said that," Rachel whispered, "on the phone, out loud." "I wrote it down," the flight attendant said. "The time and roughly what he said. I don't know if it means anything to you, but it felt wrong to just—" She shook her head. "We're trained to notice things, and that felt like a thing somebody needed to know. Here is what I understood all at once as the ground came up toward us. Rachel had spent 4 years believing she had nothing, no proof, no evidence, just her own knowledge of what Marcus was, worth nothing against the reputation he'd built for her. She'd flown out here armed with nothing but the plan to stand quietly in a building and hope she'd catch it early. And in the last 2 hours, at 35,000 feet, believing she was completely alone, a stranger 3 rows up had gotten comfortable and careless and said the quiet part out loud to a witness. A witness with no stake, no history, no reason to lie. A flight attendant trained to observe who'd written down the time. The lie Rachel told to survive 4 hours next to him had, without either of us knowing it, planted her right in front of the one thing she'd never had. "You'd write that down again?" I asked the attendant. "Officially? If someone asked?" "I already have to file it," she said. "Threatening conduct on a flight. There'll be a report regardless." I just wanted her to know before we landed. She looked at Rachel. Did he hurt you?" "He's my old manager," Rachel said, and her voice was steadier now than I'd heard it the entire flight. "He drove me out of a job 4 years ago and told everyone I was crazy, and in 2 days he starts on my little sister." She looked at me and then at the flight attendant, and something was rearranging itself behind her eyes, the thing that had been broken for 4 years, tuning itself back to true in real time. And I've spent 4 years thinking it was my word against his, and I never once imagined the word that would matter would come from a total stranger who happened to overhear him bragging. The wheels touched down. "I want to tell you what happened at the gate, because it's the part I'll carry the rest of my life." We taxied. The seatbelt sign went off. People stood and pulled bags down, and up in 24 Marcus stood too, and shot one last look back at us. At the married couple, the wife he couldn't touch, the husband he couldn't rattle. And Rachel Hale stood up in the aisle, and she was not the woman who'd grabbed my hand in a panic 4 hours before. She looked at him, and she smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes, because now she had something, and he didn't know it yet. We walked off that plane together. At the top of the jet bridge, the flight attendant caught up with us and pressed a folded slip of paper into Rachel's hand, a name, an employee number, and a note that said, "Ask for the incident report from tonight's flight, they'll have it on file." And Rachel held it like the most precious thing anyone had ever given her. In the terminal, we stopped. The husband was over. The lie had done its job, and now it was supposed to end, and we both knew it, and neither of us moved to. "I don't know how to thank you," Rachel said. "You gave me 4 hours as somebody's wife, and you gave me—" She held up the slip of paper. "You gave me my sister's whole future, and you didn't even do anything. You just sat down." "You did the thing," I said. "You reached out. Most people put their head down and let the wrong person win. You grabbed a stranger's hand instead. That's not nothing, Rachel. That's the bravest thing on that whole plane." She looked at the ring, still on my finger. "I have to give this back. I've been wearing your engagement ring for 4 hours. The one you bought for—" "Keep it," I said. It came out before I decided to say it, and the moment it was out, I knew it was the truest thing I'd said all night. I don't mean like that. I mean, I've been trying to throw it away for a week because it felt like a thing that had failed, and instead, it just spent 4 hours helping the first person who actually wanted it. My father would have liked that better than a garbage can, I promise you. He spent 30 years making broken things sing again. That ring found its note tonight. Let it keep it. Rachel Hale started to cry, standing in the middle of a terminal, and then she started to laugh at the same time, and she said, "You are the strangest man I have ever met." "So I've been told," I said. "Marcus is going to try to start on Emma Monday," she said, wiping her face. "And now I've got a witness and an incident report and a paper trail, and I am going to walk into that HR office, and I am not going to be the crazy ex-employee whose word is worth nothing. I'm going to be the woman with the documentation." She took a breath. "For the first time in 4 years, I'm not scared of him, and it's because a piano tuner sat down in the wrong seat." "Right seat," I said. "Turns out." I should tell you it moved fast after that. It didn't. That's how I knew it was real. We exchanged numbers in the terminal to sort out the ring, we told each other. It was never about the ring. She called that night to tell me she'd landed at Emma's, and we talked for 2 hours. She called the next night to tell me she'd gone to HR and the flight attendant's report was real and filed and on record, and combined with 2 other quiet complaints they'd apparently been sitting on for years, but never had enough to act on, it was finally enough. Marcus was placed on leave within the week. Emma started her job Monday in a department where the thing that had haunted her sister was already being pulled up by the roots. We talked for 3 hours that night. Within 2 weeks the ring was an excuse, and we both knew it. Within a month I'd flown back out. On purpose this time. A whole ticket bought just to see her. And we sat in a coffee shop with no lie between us, and no clock ticking over us. And I learned Rachel Hale the slow way. The real way, the way my father always said, was the only way that lasts. Everything in its place. One true note held long enough to hear it was beautiful. We went slow, we went honest. 2 people who both knew exactly what it cost to reach for the wrong thing at the wrong time, and who had both just watched the right thing come at us out of a clear sky, careful not to break it. At 3 months she could tell my mood from the first 3 words on the phone. At 6, my felt roll of tools lived in a drawer in her apartment, and I'd tuned the sad old upright in her hospital's family lounge for free, and the kids' families said the room felt different now, though they couldn't say why. It's because it wasn't lonely anymore. Somebody had finally listened close enough. A little over a year after she grabbed my hand in row 27, I asked Rachel Hale to marry me for real. I didn't buy a new ring. She wouldn't let me. She held up her hand with the old one on it, the one I'd bought for the woman who found me boring, and she said, "This one already knows the way. Don't you dare." Emma stood up beside her at the wedding. The flight attendant came. Rachel had tracked her down to thank her, and somewhere in the thanking, they'd become friends, and she cried harder than anybody. Marcus was long gone from that hospital by then, and from Rachel's life, a man who'd rewritten her once and never once imagined the version she'd write back. There was no band. I'd have known if it was terrible. I think about that flight all the time, about the man I was walking down the aisle of that plane, the piano tuner with a ring in his pocket he couldn't throw away, so sure he was the same beautiful song nobody wanted to hear twice. So sure the promise he'd made his dying father was one he'd never keep. My whole life I'd believed the steady ones, the calm ones, the ones who hold the note and fix the broken thing and leave before anyone claps. I'd believed we were the ones nobody chooses. Background music, furniture. And a frightened stranger reached out of a crowd and picked me first. Not the exciting one, not the spontaneous one, the steady one, the one whose hands don't shake. She grabbed my hand, thinking she needed a warm body to play a role for 4 hours. Here's the truth I've never told her, and maybe I never will, because some things are better just known. She thinks I saved her that night, that I handed her a husband and, by pure luck, a witness and a way out. But that isn't it. Rachel Hale would have walked into that building alone and stood guard over her sister and found her courage the hard way. The way she'd survived everything else, chin up. She didn't need saving. She needed somebody to sit still and listen close enough to hear she was never broken. That's all. That's the whole thing my father spent his life trying to teach me, and it took a stranger on a plane to finally make me do it for a person instead of a piano. She reached into a crowd for the nearest solid thing, and she picked the one man on that whole plane who'd spent 36 years waiting, without much hope left, for anybody to reach for him at all. 4 hours. That's all she asked for. It's the only 4 hours I'll ever need. If someone has ever reached out and chosen you, really chosen you, at the exact moment you'd decided you were the steady, forgettable one nobody gets excited about, I want to hear about it, because I don't believe those moments are ever really an accident. Tell me your story down in the comments and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it amazes me how far these stories travel. Somebody wrote in last week from a red-eye flight, typing in the dark so they wouldn't wake the stranger asleep on their shoulder, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. And be honest with me before you go. If a total stranger had taken your hand on a plane and whispered, "Be my husband until this flight lands," would you have played along the way I did? Or would you have pulled your hand back, found another seat, and spent 4 quiet hours never knowing the whole rest of your life had just tried to sit down beside you? There's no wrong answer. There's only the one you'd have to live with. If this story moved you even a little, do me one small kindness. Tap that like button so it finds the next person who needs it. Hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell because I'm here every single week with a brand new story about the kind of love that reaches for you out of a crowd exactly when you've stopped believing anyone ever will. Safe travels. I'm glad you're here.